I was on a health department bursary, so I was bonded to work for where the health department placed me, and I was sent first to Gisborne, and I know when the head of the school, Scott, used to call us in one at a time and tell us where we were going, and I know when I was told I was going to Gisborne, I had absolutely no idea where Gisborne was, and I think my face showed it, and I think I suddenly got burst into tears or something, because I'd wanted to go to the Wellington area. And she said, "Do you know where Gisborne is?" And I said, "No." And anyway, that sorted itself out all right, and sent to Gisborne. And I actually enjoyed it up there. We had a great time. In fact, I recommend a smaller hospital for a great camaraderie and support from medical staff and so on, because it's a time when you're developing. And there was a time this particular orthopaedic surgeon had a very, I felt, old-fashioned way of doing some things. For meniscectomies, the patient after a surgery was put in a back splint, and we had to put these cotton bandages around every time after we exercised them, and we had to put these cotton bandages which had no give in them, and you had to be able to flick them like that to be able to know whether they were firm enough or not. And they had these on for about 2 weeks. I mean, it worked. There were so many different ways I've treated post-meniscectomy patients, and they all seemed to work. But there was another one, a child that was developing a knee flexion contracture, was in a splint for a fractured femur, I think. And this particular orthopaedic surgeon, who was a brilliant orthopaedic surgeon, but was very conservative, and this child was developing a flexion contracture, and I suggested because we'd been taught to do quadriceps exercises in these Thomas splints, and it was getting a foot drop, and I suggested that we perhaps put something at the end of the foot to keep the foot up, and perhaps do a few quadriceps exercises. For a couple of weeks, we used to go on the ward round, and we were always in fear and trepidation. And after a few weeks he thought, "So I think this child needs some quadriceps exercises, and we should do something with this foot drop that's developing." So I just sat back and thought, I won that one, but never said a word, and just accept it and get on and think, that was one round we won. I thought, well, other patients will benefit later on, so yeah. No, we had good time, good parties, good times of hospital picnics and things as well, which you don't get those these days. There were 3 new graduates actually in Gisborne. It was quite interesting. And then I was transferred down to the hut, and I worked under Barbara Tomlinson, who I really enjoyed working there. I was there then for 18 months. This was about July, I think I was transferred down. She was a very good head to work under, because she encouraged you to read magazines, and she encourages us to try different techniques. And I can remember that it was the days when you did Guthrie Smith's suspension for osteoarthritic hips and things like that. And then somebody overseas had done a report was in the Charter Society Journal on doing contract relax techniques for ROF hips to try and get a bit more movement. And so she encouraged us to try these techniques and keep records of what we were doing. And we did records of hemiplegic stroke patients and how well they did, whether they reverted from all the effort we put into preventing knee contractures and walks, and whether they, once they stopped treatment, whether they'd actually maintained that, or whether in fact there was a point where it reverts, they go to like a steady state, which may not be the state that they were at, but they're mobile. And I've always used that principle, and provided they're mobile, and provided they get around, and provided we can't always go for perfection in our physiotherapeutic concept. They have to be functional and stable and steady and things like that. But anyway, we kept some records like that. She always arranged for Glenn Park, who was the advisory physiotherapist at that time, to come out and give us lectures on what was proprioceptive neuromuscular facilitation and bow bath techniques for stroke patients. So we had a really good learning situation, and I really enjoyed working with her and working under her on that basis. And then I took off overseas for a couple of years and learnt some new things over there, which I tried to bring back to. I was at Wellington Hospital after that when I returned. It was interesting trying to meet up with an orthopaedic surgeon who I had learnt to do at a small hospital in Ealing in London. I worked alongside Sweetman. He had a placement there at King Edward Memorial Hospital at Ealing. He was doing some innovative stuff like flexion for back problems, and He used to show me x-rays on recent cadavers that they'd done, and of spines which they'd injected radiopaque material into the intervertebral discs and the ligaments, and showed you what happened when you actually flexed or extended a spine. And he was doing discectomies, which had not been heard of at that stage as well. He wasn't doing a whole laminectomy when he operated on the spine. But anyway, we did these flexion exercises, which were very simple. You had to have a straightly raising test of 60 degrees to start doing flexion. And then you just started the person off, if they couldn't do it in standing, was sitting, just bending down, tucking your chin in, and just flexing down as far as you could go. And it was making sure you flexed the lumbar spine. And the basis for doing this was, he said, what is a position, which made him start thinking about it, what is the position a person with a bad back gets into, what's their comfort position? And it was flexion in the sort of fetal position. And he decided, well, there must be a reason for that, which is why he worked sort of back from that theory. And so we then progressed. Once they could fix their hips and just do flexion at the lumbar spine just by dropping forwards, we then progressed, they could do it standing. And so I suppose in a way it's sort of parallel to sort of Rob's work. He was doing extension push-ups and things, and there was a room for both, in my way of thinking. And there are some patients that respond better to flexion. And it was just flexion, and the rationale too was that you took them as far as they could, and they could practice at home, do it all the time. We just monitored. They'd just come in once every 2 weeks or something. You'd monitor how they were going. It actually worked brilliantly. And you just measure the height their fingertips got from the floor. And his theory was then what you were getting was actually active full range extension, which was much better than doing inner range extension. So you actually got full range extension as they came up each time. And we had great success from that. So I tried to introduce that when I returned to New Zealand. I was working at Wellington, and I had this patient who had I was up in the orthopaedic wards at the time, this patient who had a very bad, painful back, stiff back. And the surgeons wanted to put him into a lumbar plaster cast. And this surgeon I worked with in London disagreed with plaster casts, because he said you only get extra mobility above and below, and it causes more problems. You might fixate where the initial problem is, but you'll actually get overcorrection at the above and below. And so I was told I had to do extension exercises to get this patient straightened out enough so that they could put this plaster spiker on his trunk. Well, we weren't getting anywhere. So I started doing some flexion exercises that I'd been taught in England, and he started straightening up, and I was congratulated on, that he was now ready to have this hip spiker. I never told the surgeons what I'd done, never mentioned it, because I mentioned that I'd worked with this guy, done discectomies. Oh, rubbish, you can't do discectomies. Rubbish, absolute rubbish, which of course did come in later on, but yeah, he was a bit ahead of his time.